Well, welcome everyone to another Lighting the Candle, A World That Works. I'm Bill Carell, and I'm really pleased to be here with my cohort and longtime friend, Ken Caputo. And we're blessed to have Jan Jeremias here, a new friend of mine, to engage in the conversation today. And she's quite a risk taker and a pathfinder and all that stuff. She is willing to just come here and share herself for the benefit of you, our community, and also for Ken and myself. We're really looking forward to getting to know you better in the next hour or so, Jan. But I'll just remind our listeners, and also for your edification, we are talking on a weekly basis, creating a conversation where people can get unstuck in their lives, perhaps hear something a little bit unusual considering what's out there on the rest of social media, etc. You don't have to look very far to find things that will make you wonder whether it's okay to go out in the world. We're going to encourage you to go out in the world. We're going to encourage you to do great stuff while you're out there. This is seriously, today is a once in a lifetime opportunity for every last one of us. So why not make it the best day ever? So with that said, I want to talk today about I was just sharing with Jan that one of my clients is a homeless shelter, and the neat part of it is the folks there don't behave like they're homeless. You know, they behave like folks that have a community. They've got jobs to do. They have lives that matter and that work. And I kind of wonder, out of the 7.5 billion of us that are out there each day doing what we do every day, how many of us operate and live in the world as if this is the life we're supposed to have and we're just going about it? You know, not like there's anything special or, you know, what's our experience of being in a situation where we have work to do and we get out of bed every day and we go do it? I'll give you an example. My dear wife, she has more or less been semi-retired for about 10 or 12 years. And about a year and a half ago, decided she was antsy being home with COVID and decided to go and see if she could get a part-time job. So she went and looked up the Census Bureau. And of course, they were promising a 2-day-a-week kind of a gig. And that sounded like it was right up her alley. She could get out, maybe see some people, not stare at the four walls with just me and the cat, but, you know, go out and interact with human beings again, and not just online. So she did, and that immediately turned into about a 6-day-a-week job. She was working somewhere in the order of about 60, 65 hours a week. You know, these 2-day part-time jobs have a way of turning into that with the federal government. At least my firsthand experience, and the only one that I know, is my wife, and both of her jobs there and then at the post office afterwards. She has been working pretty much 6 days a week since the end of September because she's a backup person to another person who got injured and is not back to work yet. So she gets out of bed every single morning, 4 o'clock, maybe 5, and then out the door at 6:30, and then I see her again usually somewhere between 5:30 and 6 o'clock in the evening. Every single day is just like the day before and just like the day after. But every single day is the opportunity for the two of us to look at each other and say, best day ever. This one you got. We're not guaranteed the one that comes after this one. So go make the most of this one you possibly can. And then, as if it's the most important job in the world, because it is, every job that each of us has every time we get out of bed is the most important job in the world. And what if you knew that? And what if you weren't just going through the motions on a daily basis, but you took the time to really and truly appreciate every little thing mindfully during the course of whatever it is that you're doing today? Whether it includes people, dogs, horses, what else does she come across? Goatees. There's plenty of goatees on her route. So I get stories every night when she comes home. And I'm going to pause here, but I told you that narrative we're really making something happen here in our conversation. We are jostling the world, and we're basically saying to you, I'm not there with you right now, but I can hear your thoughts. You won't hear this for weeks to come or whenever you do hear it, but I hear your thoughts that are telling you, I'm not really sure. I don't know who to trust. Should I risk? You know, all those 80,000 thoughts that we have all day long, most of which are not our most inspired thinking. However, what if you have a thought you can put in there called, man, this is pretty cool. Am I a lucky boy or what? And with that, I will take a breath and let's see who else on our panel would like to jump in.
I think what I was struck by in the conversation with your story about your wife is the interaction. So that's what makes each day special, I think, for her, is being able to interact with different people or different beings, if it's animals or whatever it is. And that's, to me, if we can find that no matter what we do. So if we can find the way to connect with someone, especially these days, because I think people are feeling a little bit isolated, no matter, in a lot of ways with Zoom and COVID. And I think it's really all about connection, because as human beings, we need to connect.
Yeah, it is a very, very primal need. I mean, it's right at the base of Maslow's hierarchy. Uh, and you know, the shelter, enough food, and just basic human interaction and belonging.
Just thinking about you take the pressure off a little bit. Like we, by nature, we remember and then we forget.
Yes.
My mentor would call that spiritual weightlifting. There's value in the forgetting and the act of consciously remembering. So, so I don't know anyone, even someone that would consider themselves enlightened, that is fully aware and present all the time. So it kind of comes and goes, and the practice of it coming and going actually strengthens it, and it helps you find value in the circumstances you're in, and see the joy and the gratitude and all that other kind of stuff that flows from it. So but I always caution people, especially from doing like a mindfulness workshop or something like that, you're never gonna win this. you know you're going to move in and out of it, and that's kind of the point. Just the journey's the home. But you can cultivate it so it becomes more natural, and recognizing it as it arrives more and more frequently as time goes by.
Yeah, the whole idea of mindfulness as an exercise is just to notice when you're not noticing, and it's like being in communication and conversation with another human being and having thoughts that are interrupting your ability to hear and actually experience what that human being is saying, to where you would notice, I'm actually not listening to Ken right now. I guess I better give this thought up and go back to paying attention to him again, because he's very important. And so the whole notion of mindfulness is, again, it just can't possibly be 100%. Most of our lives are mindlessness, and so making this distinction of paying attention to paying attention is kind of a cool thing that you're going to remember and forget. I mean, that's what life's all about, isn't it? You get these great ideas and you get this really good, intense feeling about carrying through it. And it just seems like it's going to be a downhill run. And then 15 minutes later, what was I thinking of,
Or something comes in which totally pulls you out, and you then have to regroup and gather yourself back.
Yeah.
And I think that these days that's especially an issue, because I think we're bombarded with so much. It's very easy to get pulled out really quickly. And I mean, I have my tools that I use, which I stopped watching the news in the 1980s. I just don't turn it on. I mean, very rarely. I mean, certain things will happen, but I was just like, it just pulls me out of where I want to be, you know. And I always tell my friends, if something major happens, call me and tell me because I probably won't know.
Jan, I got to say that's brilliant because I believe in the 1980s is when the news stopped being the news.
Well, I was brilliant and I didn't even know it. See?
Yeah. See, there you go.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just too distracting and pulls you out. And usually as a downer, like, I mean, it's never, they're not talking about anything positive. And so it's just, and it's very fear-based. And I think, that's a really prime way to get out of being mindful is, being in a place of fear.
Yeah, it's also, it's interesting how often, we don't, I know I didn't until I was taught to consciously think about where you start from. So when you become aware that you're awake, do you recognize a place of center you can return to as the weather systems of the day come and go? Or do you just wake up and go? So you're literally like out of balance from the moment you're conscious. So how could you ever, so someone tells you the news and it throws you off, but then you don't have anywhere, there's no respite from that because there's no place that you started from that you can return to. And I found that really, really interesting and very helpful to just take the first few moments to, just kind of connect to what feels like a place of balance and center.
Mhm.
And if I forget to do it, the day doesn't ever go as well.
I remember when I first started meditating, and I remember, first of all, the workshop, the leader I went to said, stop thinking. And I remember like going and thinking to myself, it was the stupidest comment you could have made to me anyway, because I was like, how do you stop thinking? I mean, and so, but I've always had a room in my house or wherever I've lived. That's my dedicated space. And so I remember that, I'd get really busy and it wasn't like it was far, like I didn't have to go anywhere. And I'd be like, oh, I'm too busy right now. And then it was like walking 5 steps, but it was always actually it was quite humorous to me that, it was so close. And yet we can get pulled, we can just think that so many other things are more important. Mm-hmm. And to your point, Ken, is that it's obviously it's when I'm busier or I feel that's when I need it more. And that's when I feel the benefits of, let's say, something like meditation more, is at those moments.
Yeah.
I think that you just pointed at something really powerful there. 95% of the time, when I hear people saying how busy they are, relatively few times do they have something in their hand that they're doing. It's that there's more thoughts going on in their thought bubble than they can manage at the moment. And they're not quite sure what to do next. They're almost perplexed and flummoxed about all the opportunities that there are. And that busyness comes from having too many thoughts that don't have a beginning, a middle, and an end, but all just seem to kind of like a bowl of spaghetti with noodles everywhere, And when you find somebody who actually is organized about their thinking, they're never too busy. We all know a person or two like that, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that gave rise to that old saying of, if you want something done, you give it to a so-called busy person. But they don't consider themselves busy. That would be someone else's observation of their behavior. They just get stuff done. They know how to sort it out. They know how to, pick one thing up at a time. And, they get it done. But it's more or less the thought process as opposed to actually being physically engaged with something in their bodies and part of the process.
There's a discernment part to that that's helpful too. I mean, understanding the difference, that thing about activity versus accomplishment.
Yeah.
So, and if you've fallen in love with the feeling of being busy, there's not really a lot of discernment. You're just doing, a lot of doing and less being. So, so that's kind of an interesting thing. And we're culturalized to that. I always took pride in working a lot. Now I it's not, it's just being balanced, working optimally is more important, because what's a lot? That's it's different, that's different to each of us and where we are in our lives, and and what we're valuing, what's important. Working a lot is different when you're starting a family compared to when you're retired, so, or different seasons.
And I like your point, Ken, in the fact of, doing is different than accomplishing.
Yeah.
And, and I'll be transparent here. When I'm stressed or anxious, I do a lot because it's really a great way to kind of focus that energy.
Yeah.
And so it used to be that I would clean when I was anxious or fearful, or something really like upsetting happened. And a friend of mine would come home and I'd be like after work and I'd be scrubbing the kitchen floor and she'd be looking at Lou, she'd just look at me and go, I guess it wasn't a good day. My sister-in-law cooks, I mean, it's just like this, there's certain things that we do where we kind of that feel just like, oh, okay, well, I have something in my life under control, even though we all know that nothing, And so I just think that doing versus actually accomplishing is really good differentiation.
Yeah, it must. I bet you your responsive practice is movement. So like everybody, like minds think. So if I'm in that state, I want to study or understand more, or like whoever's cooking, that's someone that's more fuel. Like someone who will they'll cook or they'll eat it as a way to process. It's interesting how we all have our thing though. That helps us.
I mean, one of the things I do is I'm a yoga teacher. So I'm very
cool.
used to kind of taking that energy or whatever those emotions are, whatever's happening, and grounding or coming to a place of equanimity or balance in that form.
Yeah.
So moving, moving is true. To me, moving is very healing and very.
So here we are kind of lifting the hood on people that go through their normal lives. And while it's going on, there's probably not necessarily a lot of introspection or self-auditing or those sorts of things. It's kind of comes afterwards for people who have been trained that it's possible to take a notice of what you've been doing and now maybe lay some metrics on it and decide whether or not it's a practice that you want to continue, or if it's something that you're interested in maybe altering in the future. And that's that thing that I was talking about, 7.5 billion people around the world. We're really fortunate. The three of us have time to sit here and talk about thinking about or not thinking about whatever it is that we're doing, and then analyzing whether our approach is to be in motion or it's to stop and think about it. This is really, when you talk about having the best of all possible worlds, we have the time, we have the safety. I don't know, I live in a warm home and I'm very fortunate for that and I'm very thankful for it. And my wife, on the other hand, was out in 9-degree weather this morning delivering mail or doing whatever she's doing. And in the process of doing that all day long, she gets to have these little moment by moment experiences with things that work and things that don't work. And it is really like listening to George Patton coming back from his march across Europe and saying, now we came up on France and this is where this happened, and she's talking about a poodle or a golden doodle or whatever it is. And then the big smile on her face and an outright laugh, and then she's got a little internal joke that she has to let me in after she's had the laugh. And it's just a remarkable experience for me, to go through this debrief with her every afternoon. Sometimes it's over dinner, sometimes it's just the two of us sitting here in our recliners. And you were talking about your spaces that you go to in your home. Well, I'm sitting in mine, and this is where I choose to interact with the world from. If I'm online, and if I'm not online, I want to be out there on the firing line, walking up and down Main Street, meeting people, greeting human beings, giving folks hugs if it's appropriate. And in the meantime, just reminding myself, from time to time. And I say this right now because I really do want to be reminded how lucky I am to be me and be alive and coming in contact with all of these people, friends, strangers, folks I may only see one time. Go to the post office, the hustle and the bustle. And do people have their masks on? Well, some have them half on. It's just all of this soup of enjoyment to just kind of have these thoughts and reactions to folks that are coming and going. And if I were to turn this off and to close my eyes and lean back in my chair, that would be a completely different experience of the world, wouldn't it? So having that freedom of choice to do either or and everything else that we haven't talked about, it's an extraordinary place to be as a human being, to know that there is that choice available, I say.
Yeah.
So in terms of reducing stress or getting back on track, or whatever it is, when you notice that you're less than at peak performance, effectiveness, we do have to notice that about ourselves to make an adjustment, yes? So what kind of adjustment do you both make? And how would you be self-governing and self-nurturing and self-auditing in that process?
Want to go first, Jan?
No, you can go ahead, Ken.
Oh.
She wants to know how deep down the rabbit hole you're going to go.
No, I just figured that either way is fine.
Pretty simple, really. I mean, we've talked about it before. It's just making deposits in advance every day in little ways. So I've got my little Move, Think, Connect, Fuel, Empower formula there that we use. And it's just, take a few minutes to, make sure that something movement, exercise related, nourishment, learn something, discover something new, and they're just little practices each day. And then when the things happen, you're more prepared. I mean, the decades of training in martial arts and all that kind of stuff, when I blew out my AC and tore all the ligaments out, that's what helped me heal, and if I hadn't done all that stuff in advance, when the injury happened, it probably wouldn't have healed as well. So, so I think it's a lot of times, and I would see this in martial arts, you'd have someone come in to start training after they were attacked, or bullied or whatever it was. And now they're trying to play catch up on something that's occurred and fix it after the fact. It's like trying to change your diet after you have the heart attack. There's different, if we're just thinking each day we have an opportunity to do some little things that will accumulate over time, then it strengthens us. I mean, yoga is a phenomenal example of that. How much less likely are you to be injured or end up with a stroke or some kind of, immune system issue if you practice yoga every day before you need it? And then it's there for you when you actually need it,
I had that experience. Well, I think I know that experience, but just to respond to that specifically, in June, I fell and walking the dog, and I fractured my right radius. And I, went and did everything they said or whatever. But after I got through therapy, the wrist forearm orthopedist I saw, elbow, said he has never seen anybody regain full range of motion before.
Yep.
An injury like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And it has to be, all the whatever poses all those years.
Absolutely.
And the full extension that I had before to be able to recoup like that. I mean, just has to be.
Yeah. Oh, fun side note for that. I would say to adults for decades, the one skill I guarantee that you will use, that you learn in a martial arts class, is how to fall safely. I mean, you may never be attacked, but at some point
we'll chat after.
Yeah, I've had so many that would say, yeah, I slipped on the ice, I fell down the stairs, and I remembered, I relaxed, and I know I would have gotten hurt a lot more if I hadn't developed that skill. But it's funny, it's like, you spend these years in class getting knocked on the ground and learning how to actually relax into that process. And you know, at some point you're going to use it, but you can't predict when. So
Right.
all you can do is practice until it happens. And yeah, so you basically did prehab for years before that injury happened. I guarantee that had a significant impact on the result that you experienced.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think for me, I always return to my breath. That is like my anchor, no matter where I am. That is like, it's my best measure for how I'm feeling. If I hold my breath, if my breath seems very rapid, I just automatically, I'm like, okay, pause and breathe. Just pause and breathe. It's like um, my kind of reflex place to go. And so that has been probably one of my most useful practices because you can do it anywhere. No matter where you are, you can stand online in the grocery store. And I remember doing that in the beginning when COVID first hit. And that was like very stressful. There were lines, people were wearing masks. You didn't know, like, we didn't really know how easily transmissible it was. And I remember sitting there and thinking to myself, okay, just breathe. Just breathe. And so I think I like the portability of it. Yeah. For me, I think one of my biggest anchors has been the element of gratitude, is really to find like the smallest thing from the largest thing to be thankful for. And one of the practices, as a yoga teacher, amongst the other things I do, I remember, I think every yoga workshop you ever do in your life tells you to keep a gratitude journal. That's just like something that you should do. And I was never very successful at it. They would sit there and say, well, you have to write down 10 things in a day that you're grateful for. And I would be like, when I didn't find 10 things, I would feel like I was this horrible person, like I was a failure. Like, how could I not find 10 things that I was grateful for? And so during COVID, and I have a great picture, during COVID, what happened was I first of all said, okay, I'm going to think of one thing every day, like one thing every day that I'm grateful for. And I decided that I was going to write it on Post-it notes and I was going to put it on a wall in my kitchen. So originally when it started, I didn't think it was, and by the time like I finally took it all down, it was like a wall and a half of my kitchen because I just kept them up. And I think for me, it was a great visual. Like I'd be having a hard day or something and I just look up and right in front of my face were like these 100 Post-it notes of like, Jan, like get a grip. Like, look at how much you have to be grateful for. And that was huge for me.
That's perfect. That's exactly what we're talking about. We're actually, you are too busy reminding yourself what a blessed person you are, that you have all this stuff to be grateful for. I like that. And I really have to tell you, I was a huge, huge sticky monster for all through the 90s. When I could put sticky notes on my computer, they actually had a little application at one point that was called Stickies that went down in the in the tray in the bottom of the computer. I have thousands of stickies in that old file that I can now only open up as a text file because the application no longer works. But I've got quotes from people all over the world. I've got, little isms from AOL. I've got whatever, and I can just imagine, the power. You've both heard of affinity exercises, right? Where everyone writes down their comments about, something that needs to happen. And then one by one, they go up and they place their sticky notes, in categories where they think they should be grouped with other things that are of a similar, kind of a tone. But it's a powerful way then to walk around and look at everybody's notes and thoughts on a subject without having to have a verbal, out loud conversation where people are thinking about something else. You're just reading the sticky notes and you're experiencing the ideas without having to have a lot of thoughts before the end of the sentence. And I love that whole approach. I think I'm probably going to shamelessly steal that idea, Jan.
Feel free.
Yeah.
feel free. I mean, I also do write. I think writing or having some way like some form of creative expression of is a really great avenue for, um, you know, for being able to release whatever so that you come to a centered place. And maybe that's writing or maybe just being creative in another way.
Sure.
But I think that it's a really good way to, I always call like writing like it's like a brain dump in some ways. Like you just can dump it out into the, through the pen or a pencil and into the paper, and then kind of helps you become a little more centered and grounded.
So I like that. I took note of something. I'm actually, I don't know, sort of eight months into a program called Noom, which really is a psychological and weight loss, but it's for managing the 4 pillars of health, which is sleep, exercise, nutrition, and stress, right? And when you have a handle on those things and you have them in balance, all things are possible. So they're never in balance. They really are never in balance. So there's always some new thing to learn about how life is going today, and et cetera. So the whole notion of asking questions is a cornerstone of these, I don't know, some like 95, 96 episodes of Lighting the Candle. We're all about getting to a place where we can ask a better question. And so I really like this that I saw in the Noom this morning or yesterday. Asking questions helps you slow down, think, be self-aware, and stay motivated to make better decisions. And then step 5, I'm now going to say, write a sticky note. So once you have an insight and you've gotten back to a point where you've kind of interrupted the thoughtlessness, and guess what? There's nothing wrong with thoughtlessness. There's a time and a place for it where you're fully engaged and you're just concentrating on what you're doing. There you go. Yes. Now you write books on your sticky notes, Alex.
I switched to bigger ones because the little ones I was filling up too fast.
and I know you've seen the ones that are 8.5 by 11. Those, I mean, holy mackerel.
I got one of those behind me.
Well, like-minded people have gathered here, like they just looking at all our
well.
sticky notes. It's like, okay.
I don't think we have secrets any longer.
That's right.
It's definitely out.
I'm actually notorious as a Post-it. I mean, every office I've ever had ends up wallpapered with them, and people would find silly ones that were shaped like stars and hearts and give them to me for gifts and stuff. So yeah, I love it.
Well, when one of the things that I did when I started one of the companies, it was actually a consulting company for coaching high earners and CEOs and people that were kind of at the top of the food chain in their particular organization, and not necessarily in a good way, which basically meant they had no mentorship around them. They had nobody to bounce ideas off of. So what did I do to give away to all these people? I printed up, stickies and put the, the logo of the company on it. And at the top of the sticky, it basically said, "Now what?" So, the coming full circle on the whole conversation here. Have you ever noticed that there's a huge distinction between experiencing something alone, or experiencing something with a partner, or experiencing something? I'm actually using both tenses of the word, because while you're experiencing it, you are in the experience, and doing that in a group of people where it's an invitation for people to share what their experience is. And sometimes what that adds is more brushstrokes of color. It adds more depth and richness, and another way to kind of heighten the experience, if you will, through the feedback and the comments and just the gestures and reactions of the folks that are walking along with you. And I find that with animals too. I'm not making any distinctions here. I think whoever you're with, partner group, it could be a bunch of dogs, it could be a dog and a cat, it could be a mouse in your pocket. I don't know.
I think that's definitely true. I mean, I think that, especially when you're dealing with animals and kids, because I think there's a lot less interpretation than that goes into things. So whatever the reaction is to me is a lot more pure and a lot more in touch with like nature. And so it's like going somewhere. I remember flying for the first time when I wasn't flying for the first time. I was going down to visit my folks, and I took my nephew with me, and he had never been on a plane before.
Yeah.
And the experience of being with him and taking him on a plane, and all the 1,000 questions, he was like 10, I think. So the 1,000 questions he asked me, and what every single little thing was, and, and everything, so the experience of doing it and being with someone else was totally different. I mean, it was obviously fantastic. I mean, it was so much fun to like kind of see it through his eyes, which is, I think, when you do things with other people, whoever that is, like whether it be an animal or a child or a significant other or whatever, you get the experience through their eyes. If everybody, even if it's just by the expression that's on their face.
Yeah.
They can be great mirrors too.
I was just going to say, I remember when I came back from the University of Colorado after my first year of vacation out there, and not successful in fact, but I ended up getting a job that following summer and riding to an electric boat with my dad and one of the guys that worked in his department. And he had a small daughter who was 4 years old. And so every morning there would be stories. And then every once in a while he would just bring up, well, he says, Vicky's really getting inquisitive out there. And she wants to know, why are rocks? Why are rocks, Daddy? I go, whoa. Why are rocks what? He's an engineer, right? He's like, wow, this kid, she needs like a whole sentence, give me something to work with here. And I didn't have the grounding at that time, but now I can look back on that and say, what a brilliant question for a 4-year-old, right? Do you understand that an adult could never have the freedom to ask a fundamental question, a question about what is a rock doing here at all? A 4-year-old doesn't have that kind of language. And how would a person be able to stop where they are and experience that question? Why are trees, Daddy? Wow. Isn't that something we all want the answer to, and we know we'll never get it?
Yeah, I was just thinking, especially kids, they're great mirrors. They'll, wherever you're at energetically and you're, excited or sad, or they have a tendency to reflect that back. So, especially when you're working with groups of kids, it can create some very interesting dynamics. Yeah. So, but yeah, they just respond,
I mean, animals are pretty much the same way, doing a lot of animal work. And I had a dog behaviorist that I worked with at one time. And he used to say that the leash is just an external umbilical cord, my favorite expression, because basically what goes up the leash goes down the leash and vice versa.
Yeah.
And, my dog is a direct mirror of who I am, and has been a huge, and in that way, they're such great teachers for you, because then when it's kind of like you see in them your behavior, and you're like, oh, like if I'm anxious and it makes him anxious, I'm like, and I'm even like apologizing, like, I'm sorry, bud, like, I know this is me, so there is that kind of response, and you kind of get to see yourself. And I think it's a totally, like, a lot of times maybe we all do, but I don't think a lot of people sometimes understand how they are.
Yeah.
And us too
Mhm.
sometimes. And then all of a sudden we'll get that mirror back and we'll like, oh,
Yeah.
right. Like, I guess I'm in this space right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes the response is, "Why are you being so annoying?"
Right.
And the silent answer from the animal is because I felt like that's what you needed.
That's right. That's right. That's right. I always say you get the animals you need. I
I
have, I,
totally
I
believe that.
I have clients that tell me all the time, like, really, like I do, like not what they wanted to hear at all, but yeah.
I think that's a line to a Rolling Stones song, if I remember correctly.
The leash thing is funny. My golden, who I miss every day, it's been 3 years, but she walked herself. She just folded her leash up, put it in her mouth, and she'd go prancing along, and it's her favorite thing to do. She was so independent.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, just the relationship is incredible, and
Yeah.
absolutely, it's just, yeah. She was there for me when I needed her most. It's cool.
Yeah, it is cool. And kids are very much, I mean, in a lot of ways, so much the same way. I mean,
Mhm.
there's no filter.
Nope.
They say what's on their mind a lot of the time. They just, say it like it is.
Yeah, up to a point.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to tell you, there comes a kind of a dividing line, and I'm not exactly sure it is. It's probably not the same for all children, but I'm watching my grandchildren progress, and as they get closer to double digits and into double digits in age, they're now more suppressed in terms of expressing their thoughts and views. And sometimes it takes a little bit of coaxing and to be that annoying person in their face that reminds them to open up and actually have to be self-expressed and joyful.
Years ago, and I don't even know how factual this was. I have no idea like what went behind this, but it was an article saying that they had done some kind of study, and again, I don't know how big the group was or whatever, but it was something like 80% of kids by the time they're 16 have been taught that their dreams and aspirations are unrealistic. That it's just not, and not even in a like from well-meaning sources. I know it was like that for me. It's like, oh, I know you think you can do that, but this would be the safer thing to do, or this would be they have your interests at heart. But you're right, they're slowly starting to outline that box that they believe you need to be in to be able to function well. you know so it's an interesting thing, and there's some value in that too, because a little bit of reality is healthy. Gravity actually does work. I mean, there are some things that, we should probably pay attention to.
Right, but a little bit
Yeah.
of something versus all the time is really, I think, a cultural malady. I mean, it's almost like the culture caught cold. And now when somebody expresses something it's a unique vision or something that doesn't fit in, like, what is it Maslow said, every great idea sounds really crazy at the beginning.
Yeah.
And it's like a 4-year-old is like, so what? I could do anything, you know?
Well, I think one of the most valuable skills that you can be taught, especially, it's hard when you're a teen because the brain isn't fully developed yet, but just understanding going through the process of risk assessment,
Yep.
and just so that when you're making a choice, like one of the best 3-question business thing from a book called The Road Less Stupid by a guy named Keith Cunningham. He said, just ask these questions before you make a decision. What's the upside? What's the downside? And can you live with the downside? And so it's not judging whether it will work or not. It's not this either or thing. It's, okay, let me frame this decision I'm about to make, by recognizing the potential risk reward, the benefit ratio, and will I accept that? So if I do something dumb and I pay a price, I knew I was going to pay a price and I chose to take that risk. I mean, that would be a healthier thing than, oh, you might not want to risk that because it might not work out. Well, what does not working out mean? I mean, I ran the race and I didn't win and I feel bad because I didn't win or I got mocked because of it. Is that a price that you're unwilling to pay? Maybe it is, but maybe it's not that big a deal. But again, we don't think that through in advance. We don't really teach kids to think that through in advance, to live with the consequence of the risk, or to choose not to take the risk because they don't want to live with that consequence. Let them think that through a little bit. But again, that's hard to do when the part of your brain that actually processes that doesn't develop until you're in your 20s. So, it's an interesting conundrum I've danced with for a lot of years, especially with teenagers.
Jan, would you go next, please?
I was going to say that the idea that, we kind of, I want to say, curb the enthusiasm. I want to like to say that, curb the enthusiasm of, let's say, teens or kids to do something. It's always very interesting to me that the people I meet always, a lot of times get there anyway, me included. Obviously not, and usually because they were kind of maybe discouraged on that aspect, it's never the direct way. It's usually they came by it via doing 20 other things, and that's where they end up anyway. And so some of that, when I look at kids and I think about kids, is how much of it is it like really them? Like when you're making that decision to say something to a child or to a teenager, like how much of it are you really looking at who they really are when you make that recommendation? And, especially if you're a parent and you're around those kids all the time, you really, I think most, they know their kids and they know what their qualities are and what their loves are, let's say. And, and what fears do you have or what's going on in your life that makes you color it for them almost?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, who are you making the recommendation for? Is it for the parent or is it actually for the kid?
Almost never for the kid.
Yeah.
Almost never for the kid. It's usually the speaker speaking their own life.
Yeah.
It's like when I started my business, I went around and told people I'm going to work for myself. Well, how are you going to handle insurance? How are you going to handle your retirement? How are you going to do this? How are you going to do? Boy, that's really hard. 1 in 10 companies make it, and the rest of them die, and you're gonna die. So, but I think the whole notion of interacting this way with children. It's a natural thing for adults to try to protect people that they love from unseen things that they can't even predict. I can't protect you from this choice because this is far beyond my reach. I can't do anything about this, and I really hope that you're successful, but I don't think you will be because most people are not. And then when it all comes back down to it, the whole idea of asking the question in advance is so powerful. Can you live with the outcome either way? Do you realize the power in making that choice ahead of time? If you didn't make that choice and you did something and it didn't work out, how long are you walking around questioning your decision to do what you did, as opposed to, I knew this was one of the possibilities in advance. I said I was going to go ahead and do it. Next.
Yeah.
And also the regret if you don't do something. Like to me, that's a huge thing, is the kind of thing of like the fact that you don't make the decision, you don't have that, or you're not, you don't ask those questions.
Yep.
And then you go through the what if scenario, like for years and years, like what if I had made that choice? And I think when you ask the questions ahead of time, you kind of say, like you're coming to a different place. So you kind of say, okay, well, I made the choice and this was why. And not to say that necessarily, but it's a little different than not having that awareness to begin with. And then you always have the what if scenario.
Yeah. And it's interesting how, like, we're listening to a podcast. I can't remember who it was, might've been Tim Ferriss, but they were talking about the qualities of entrepreneurs, and one of them is a high tolerance for risk.
Yes.
And and I heard that, and it was kind of an interesting thing, because looking even with adults, but with kids specifically, some of them do not have a high tolerance for risk. So you ask them the questions and they're like, no, 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 I don't want to risk it. And then there's the part of you like, I have a high tolerance for risk, I'm an entrepreneur. So I'm like, well, why wouldn't you? And then you find yourself like projecting your tolerance levels onto them, and now we're back to that influencing thing, and it's so like subtle and kind of insidious, because you got to remember, they're not you, they're different. And and if they have a lower tolerance for risk, then they may just not want, they may rather have the regret, or maybe they end up with less regret, because what they would regret is the failure. So I don't know, but it's such a fascinating thing, because there's a lot of different dimensions to it. And now you're back to mindfulness and self-awareness. I mean, if a kid said, you know what, I have a low tolerance for risk, I don't like taking risks. Okay, I can respect that you know that about yourself. And and if you understand the upsides and the downsides, and you can live with the downsides of that approach to life, who's to say that's wrong?
So here's the really cool thing about that. I'm going to say right now, it's all a frickin' conversation, guys. How did you come to that decision that you are a low risk person? Give me a freaking break around here. We make decisions about ourselves like we know something, and then we forget we made that decision, and that's just who we are from now on, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to introduce myself. I am a low risk tolerant person. I hope you'll interact appropriately with me, and when you don't, I will smack the crap out of you. Okay.
Well, and again, isn't that an interesting thing? Because that, again, there wouldn't be saying it out loud, but recognize, and maybe it's you just started a family. Your first child was just born.
Yes.
I guarantee your tolerance for risk is going to be a lot lower at that phase of your life than it's going to be when your kids are grown and you don't have as much that you need to worry about. So.
Yeah, sorry, Ken. But I think it also depends not only where you are, but to realize that there might be certain aspects of your life that you are a risk taker. And other risks where you're not. It's kind of like the idea of, I always think of, the mindfulness I've done in the meditation of like, okay, the difference between saying I'm afraid, or as opposed to I am with the feeling of fear, where it's not all who you are. It's like, that's just one single little part of myself. And when I think about this, it might be in one area of my life, I'm a huge risk taker. And in another area of my life, I tend to be somewhat reserved and I'm not a risk taker.
Yeah.
So maybe there is that differentiating point too.
That's actually a really interesting one, especially when you start thinking in the circle of relationships. Like, are you a personal risk taker? But then when it comes to people around you, do you not want to engage in risk that could, endanger them in some way? But then if it's just you and no one else is gonna, so that's like that could be a fun, just experiment, almost like a thought experiment for people. Where's my threshold, and how does that change dynamically depending on where I am and the circumstances around it.
Exactly. The other really cool part of that is that nobody ever has this thought about themselves.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's the cool thing.
It's brought up.
Having the I almost like just visualize like the spider chart, like when they're looking at
And that's what our lives really look like, right? There's no
no. What a cool kind of. Yeah, that'd be really interesting. I'm going to do it for myself now. I'm curious.
Well, I will tell you one thing, that while you were speaking about that, I was kind of envisioning through my life, I have met different people that I could actually envision them either outlining the points that they were going to make in their head. The outline is now secure, so I will now start speaking. Or you ask them a question and they do the T chart and the pros on the right and the cons on the left, and they sort it all down. Theorem says cons win. No, I don't think I'll go there. We could actually see the mathematical brain, sorting out what the risk and reward is all the way down to the bottom. And then 15, 20 seconds later, the answer comes out. And I don't think that any of us, until we are schooled in the whole idea of decision-making processes and how to do it responsibly, and that the mother of all sentences after something doesn't work is, did anyone die? No one died? Okay. Shall we move on? Or do you need more time to grieve this really bad experience that you just had because of your own decision? No, I think we're done here.
I know the thing I'd ask the teens was, how'd that work out for you?
Yeah.
Exactly. Or, I mean, I remember like thinking to myself, like if I had a decision to make, if I make this decision, like, is it going to kill me?
Right.
Like, you know, I mean, and, you know, okay, it's okay. You know, so that same kind of train of thinking.
And
Yeah.
it's whenever a model can be demonstrated to people, either in language or visually, like for instance, the whole hero's journey process, which is the circular process, which ends up after you've completed, taking the action, that you planned for, that proved a hypothesis at the beginning that may have been based on previous experience. And when you get back to that last period, you would then, look at what you've learned most recently, and now you take a time out. You rest and recover and get ready to go into the next round, with 100% vigor and 100% acuity, and as much self-efficacy as possible. All those other great multisyllabic words that we could come up with. The neat thing of all of that is once someone gets a pictorial process that they then can lean on, it's fun to watch people get stuck with that particular process until a new one can be introduced. And when they find a new one that kind of stands on and goes further than the previous experience, it's almost like, alchemy in life. We all want to make gold. And not many of us have the lead to start with, but, we all want to make gold.
I think the post part of when something happens is a very uncomfortable place for people to be. It's a very, that kind of at the end when you've kind of like the whole thing has culminated and you've kind of come to the end and before something else starts. I find people are feel very, I don't know if it's vulnerable is a good word, or just like there's an element of the unknown and where am I going from here that they haven't maybe figured out. And I think that place is sometimes quite uncomfortable for people, I find.
Can you keep talking? Because this is a really interesting dynamic. I don't have a lot of recent experience with this, but you're now bringing things up from the past when I used to work in large organizations.
And I feel so bad because I have to go in a few minutes, but I have another meeting. But no, I'm just thinking about when I came off certain circumstances myself, where I really had an objective and I had a focus and I completed that. And then all of a sudden I had been so focused on what I was doing and that whole process, and it had a beginning, a middle, and an end, that till the next thing started, I kind of felt like, okay, well, what am I supposed to do now? Like, what am I supposed to, like, oh my gosh, like, it's almost like when I can think of a practical experience. It's almost like when you're planning a really big event.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden that event is over. And you're like, oh my gosh, like there's all this space, which I have to spill, like this time space, which I have to feel like, or people feel like they have to fill. And that's where that pause where you said, like the pause where people kind of go, okay, well, let me kind of evaluate in the hero's journey. Let me evaluate and let me see, what did I learn? And I think that space people don't take enough time for.
Yeah. Part of that recovery period is listening for what's next. That's a very powerful part of it. And in many cases, there's a thrownness to immediately either want to put something there yourself or sign up for somebody else's future that they're projecting on you, That was always one of my favorite things. If you don't put things in your calendar, somebody else is going to put their calendar into you, so. But where we are right now in our journey is where we are coming up on the hour. Do you need to jump off at the top of the hour here?
Yeah, I do, and I feel like, oh no, I don't want to go. But
Well, that's if you're on more of these calls, I really hope that that's what you're left with, because our method of finding out whether we think we're making the dreams come true of those listeners in the future is whether or not you and I are having a great time right now.
well, I did. I had a great time.
Well, I'm really pleased that you could join us today. I don't know if there's an awful lot more to say, but Jan, is there anything you'd like to wrap up? You know, this is your first experience on our podcast, Lighting the Candle, A World That Works. Any closing remarks?
No, I just think that this has been a great experience for me, and I hope it's helpful or just beneficial to somebody who's listening. And that I think these are important conversations to have.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And I'm getting feedback from people from the future. Absolutely what you've been doing for the last hour is very beneficial, and they thank you for it.
Wow. Thank you, guys.
Ken, anything else?
I am good. Grateful as always. It's fun.
Very grateful.
With
Yeah.
that said, we're going to say bye for now. Come back and see us again. Listen whenever you can. And go out and have the best day ever.
That's right.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you all.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, A World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch us each week, as well as the rest of the network, at exvadio.com/podcasts, as well as the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.